Imagine two homes that look almost identical from the outside. The first was built in 1912 in Chicago's Rogers Park neighborhood. 2 stories, a narrow exposed brick facade, and a pitched roof. Step through a small side door and you find a tight wooden staircase descending 8 feet below the ground floor. Down there, it smells like any old Midwestern basement, a mixture of decades-old damp, aging concrete, and heating oil. The walls are heavy concrete. Rectangular windows sit just below the ceiling, level with the street outside. A black boiler, wrapped in a web of pipes, occupies an entire wall. At the back are stacks of old cans, a sawdust-covered workbench, and a middle-aged washing machine. The second home was built in 1998 in a new development in Katy, Texas. It also has 2 stories and a brick facade, but its ground floor rests directly on a concrete slab poured at grade. There is no staircase leading down. There is no side door. There is no boiler, no workshop, and no buried laundry room. An entire section of the older home simply does not exist in the newer one. In many designs, that means more than 3,500 cubic feet of space vanished between one generation of homes and the next. And the lazy explanation, the one offered immediately at any backyard barbecue, is always the same. It was done to cut costs. But that answer merely closes the case. It explains nothing. To understand why basements disappeared, we must first discover why they existed. There are several initial suspects. Cost is the most popular. Everyone repeats that basement excavation became more expensive, concrete prices rose, and skilled waterproofing labor began costing more. There is truth in that, but the theory collapses when someone points out that basements are still built by the thousands in Minneapolis, Cleveland, and Boston, yet remain extremely rare in Miami, Houston, and Phoenix, even though construction costs do not differ enough between those cities to explain the divide. If price explained everything, every region would have abandoned the space below ground. The second popular suspect is moisture. Basements flood. Basements grow mold. Basements create headaches. There is truth here as well, yet rainy cities such as Seattle and Portland continue building homes with basements, while dry cities such as Las Vegas have nearly abandoned them. The third suspect is the size of modern homes. Some claim that houses became smaller and therefore lost their underground level. The problem is that official data from the U.S. Census Bureau shows precisely the opposite. The average floor area of new single-family homes built in the United States grew from approximately 1,500 square feet in 1950 to more than 2,500 square feet in 2020. Homes nearly doubled in size, and still, an entire portion of them was eliminated. None of these explanations solves the case alone. Each offers only a partial clue. What ties those clues together is a much longer story, one that begins well before the refrigerator, air conditioning, and the slab-on-grade foundation. Go back 3 centuries. A farming family outside Strasbourg, in France's Alsace region, needs to keep potatoes harvested in October edible until May. A family in Vermont, in New England, needs to preserve apples, carrots, and a crock of butter through 6 months of winter. An Italian family in Piedmont needs to age wine for years at a stable temperature. Without knowing one another, all of these families discovered the same quiet solution. They excavated a space beneath or beside the house, taking advantage of the fact that, below a depth of approximately 5 feet, ground temperatures remain reasonably stable throughout the year. In Boston, soil at that depth fluctuates only between approximately 48 and 55 degrees Fahrenheit from winter to summer. It is effectively a natural refrigerator. Centuries before electricity, This thermal behavior of the earth gave rise to domestic cellars, wine cellars, root cellars, and German Keller. Burying food was more effective than any icebox, and digging underground was cheaper than constructing a refrigerated outbuilding above ground. The cellar was born from the family's stomach, before it became part of the home's engineering. By the late 19th century, the basement's role began to change. Industrialized cities across the northern United States and northern Europe began adopting central heating. Homes acquired coal-fired boilers with steam or hot water coils that distributed heat through radiators in every room. The boiler was large, heavy, and filthy. It needed a concealed, ventilated location with access for coal deliveries. The basement became the obvious answer. Beside the boiler, a coal bunker held tons of fuel each season, usually delivered by trucks that tipped coal through a small window at sidewalk level. It was not unusual for a middle-class Boston family in 1910 to burn between 4 and 6 tons of coal in a single winter, all of it stored below ground. As household plumbing became more sophisticated, hot water, sewer, steam, and eventually gas pipes began crossing beneath the floor. The basement stopped being a food cellar and became a mechanical room. It was the home's mechanical lung. Without it, the modern house of the early 20th century simply could not function. But that logic began to collapse after the Second World War. This is where the leading suspect in the basement's disappearance enters the story. In 1947, a company called Levitt & Sons, led by developer William Levitt, began building a development of 7,500 homes on Long Island, New York, a project that would become known as Levittown. The operation was military in its efficiency. Construction was divided into 26 specific stages, each performed by a crew trained for that single task. At the development's peak, one house was completed every 16 minutes. 30 units were finished in a single day. To achieve that speed, Levitt made a decision that faced resistance from the local building code, but ultimately proved decisive. He eliminated the basement. The houses were built directly on concrete slabs at ground level, with radiant heating delivered through hot water pipes embedded inside the slab itself. According to biographer David Halberstam, the most important lesson Levitt carried from his earlier experience building military housing in Norfolk, Virginia, was that the basement was the most difficult and complicated part of a house. Eliminating it meant eliminating weeks of work, thousands of cubic meters of excavated soil, tons of additional concrete, layers of waterproofing, and drainage systems. The municipal code required basements. Levitt fought the requirement. At a public hearing, one resident reportedly shouted that he already lived in a basement, his mother-in-law's, and the requirement was repealed. The houses of Levittown became an American model for the rest of the 20th century. What Levitt understood before almost anyone else was that homes no longer needed basements because the functions once performed there were disappearing. The electric refrigerator, popularized during the 1930s and 1940s, retired the food cellar. Coal-fired boilers gave way to much smaller oil-burning systems and later natural gas furnaces that could fit inside closets or compact utility rooms. Coal deliveries disappeared. Pipes began running through walls or through narrow cavities between the slab and the ground. The laundry room moved to the ground floor beside the kitchen. And then, almost without anyone noticing, the underground story lost its historical reason for existing. What remained, when anything remained at all, was optional extra space valued largely out of habit. And habit is the weakest suspect of all. It survives while the climate and building codes demand it. It vanishes when the market offers a faster alternative. At this point, the investigation must descend into a piece of physics that many people underestimate. There is a phenomenon governed by what engineers call the frost line. In cold climates, when outdoor air remains below 32 degrees Fahrenheit for weeks, the cold penetrates the ground and freezes the water trapped between soil particles. Water expands by approximately 9% when it freezes. That increase is small inside a glass, but enormous across a cubic yard of soil. When that expansion occurs beneath a shallow foundation, it pushes the structure upward unevenly, a process known as frost heave. It is like leaving a full bottle in the freezer and later finding that it has burst. Beneath a home, the effect does not immediately shatter the concrete, but it produces millimeter-scale movements that crack walls, throw doors out of alignment, break tile floors, and compromise entire corners of the structure. Building codes in cold regions therefore require the bottom of the footings to extend below the local frost line. In Minneapolis, that depth can reach approximately 5 feet. Across parts of interior Alaska, it exceeds 8 feet. In Boston and Chicago, it is generally around 3 feet. In Denver, it is approximately 3 feet as well. By contrast, in Miami and southern Arizona, the frost depth is effectively 0. The winters are not cold enough to freeze the ground. That physical difference explains much of the mystery. If a builder in Minneapolis already needs to excavate 5 feet to place the footings below the frost line, the marginal cost of digging another 3 feet to create usable basement headroom becomes much smaller. The excavation is already open. The concrete foundation walls must already be built. Turning that volume into a usable basement can become relatively inexpensive. But in Houston or Orlando, where a builder can pour a slab directly on grade with almost no excavation, adding a basement means creating from scratch an underground volume that nature never required. It means purchasing a problem where none existed before. Excavating 3,500 cubic feet of soil, the equivalent of approximately 8 full dump trucks, and turning the void into a room requires reinforced concrete walls, waterproofing around the entire perimeter, foundation drainage, exterior thermal insulation, and protection against another nearly invisible vulnerability. That vulnerability has a name: radon. It is a naturally occurring, colorless, odorless radioactive gas produced by the decay of uranium in certain rocks and soils. As it rises from the ground, the gas can accumulate in enclosed spaces below grade. The United States Environmental Protection Agency considers radon the country's second leading cause of lung cancer after smoking, estimating that long-term exposure contributes to more than 20,000 deaths each year. Since 1988, federal guidance and building recommendations have encouraged mitigation systems in high-risk regions using passive or powered vent pipes that draw the gas from beneath the slab and exhaust it above the roof. That adds cost. It adds complexity. It gives a production home builder one more reason to think twice before excavating. Alongside radon comes hydrostatic pressure. Water accumulating in the soil pushes against basement walls and floors like an empty box being forced down into a swimming pool. In areas with a high water table, that pressure can become strong enough to penetrate or even rupture poorly executed seals. Sump pumps are installed in pits beneath the basement floor to remove that water continuously. A pump failure during a severe storm can turn an entire basement into a pool within hours. That is exactly what occurred in Houston during Hurricane Harvey in 2017, in Baton Rouge during the historic floods of 2016, and across numerous Midwestern cities during recurring flood events. The basement, once a refuge, became a liability in flood-prone regions. At first, the mystery appears solved. Cost and engineering led suburban builders in mild climates to abandon the basement. But then comes the reversal. The functions once performed by the basement did not disappear with it. They simply migrated. Furnaces, electrical panels, main plumbing lines, air conditioning filters, water heaters, and propane tanks all needed to find a new address inside the home. In many modern designs, they occupied part of the garage, which grew larger to accommodate them. In others, they moved into the attic, which gained additional headroom for air-handling equipment. Elsewhere, they colonized utility closets beside bathrooms or small exterior compartments attached to the house. The space, therefore, was not eliminated from domestic life, it was relocated, and in many cases, it was moved onto a more expensive portion of the property. An enlarged garage consumes above-ground lot area that could otherwise have become a garden, backyard, or habitable room. A conditioned attic requires expensive thermal insulation and specialized ventilation. The basement vanished from the architectural imagination, but its functions continued demanding cubic feet inside the home. Those cubic feet were now visible, competing with living rooms and bedrooms for valuable space. Another curious phenomenon has emerged in the contemporary American property market. In the most expensive cities in the United States, particularly Manhattan, Los Angeles, San Francisco, and parts of Washington, the basement has returned. It has returned as a luxury amenity. High-end homes in historic neighborhoods began receiving full underground levels with gyms, home theaters, climate-controlled wine cellars, game rooms, and, in some cases, indoor swimming pools. The reason is economic. When land costs rise beyond $20,000, $30,000, or $50,000 per square meter, roughly $1,900 to $4,600 per square foot, digging downward becomes cheaper than purchasing more land beside the house. The same solution abandoned in the inexpensive suburbs of the 1950s returned in the costly metropolitan neighborhoods of the 2010s. In London, the phenomenon acquired its own name. They are called iceberg homes, properties whose underground volume can be several times greater than the floor area visible from the street. Some projects excavated 3 or 4 stories beneath the garden of a Victorian townhouse. The Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea began restricting these enormous basements because excavation work was damaging neighboring properties. The basement was never merely one type of room. It has always been a response to local economic pressure. The current picture therefore refuses to fit a single rule. The choice among a basement, a crawl space, a raised pier foundation, or a slab-on-grade foundation depends on a specific combination of variables: local climate, frost line depth, groundwater level, soil type, particularly whether it is expansive, clay-rich, sandy, or rocky, municipal regulations, flood zones mapped by FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, the presence of radon identified through regional surveys, land prices, local construction traditions, buyer preferences, the risk of tornadoes, especially across the region known as Tornado Alley, which includes Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, northern Texas, and South Dakota, where basements and reinforced shelters gain additional value as personal protection. Water-resistant concrete, prefabricated PVC membranes, perimeter drains made from perforated pipes surrounded by crushed stone, exterior extruded polystyrene insulation, controlled ventilation, and backup systems for sump pumps have made basements safer than they were in 1930. But none of these technologies has completely eliminated the risks that make builders think twice before lowering the floor below grade. A recent trend adds even more complexity. Homes built to stringent energy efficiency standards, such as Germany's Passive House Standard and Canadian Net Zero programs, treat the basement in an entirely new way. It becomes part of the home's thermal envelope. That means its walls and floor slab must be insulated, sealed against air leakage, and mechanically ventilated using heat recovery systems. A poorly designed basement in a high-performance home becomes a source of condensation, mold, and wasted energy. A well-designed basement becomes usable throughout the year, with stable temperatures and controlled air quality. Modern engineering has given the underground level a sophistication it never possessed in the exposed pipe, noisy boiler basements of the early 20th century. At the same time, increasingly extreme weather events, with short and intense bursts of rainfall, have led some American cities to reconsider permits for new underground spaces in areas facing a growing risk of urban flooding. The basement is undergoing a second transformation of identity, faster than the public realizes. In the end, the case has no single culprit. It was not only cost, it was not only moisture, it was not only the post-war suburb, it was not only the warm climate, it was the combination. The refrigerator eliminated the food cellar, the compact furnace eliminated the boiler and the coal bunker. Modern plumbing no longer depended on a full underground level. William Levitt proved on Long Island that a house could move through production at a rate of 1 every 16 minutes if no one had to excavate beneath it. The warm climate of the American South and Southwest reinforced that choice. Radon and high water tables discouraged a reversal. And the extraordinary price of metropolitan land brought the basement back through the side door, this time as an amenity, rather than a necessity. A home is more than what can be seen above ground. It is the physical record of the needs accumulated by every generation that inhabited it. The early 20th century basement stored potatoes and coal. The mid-20th century basement held boilers and pipes. When the early 21st century basement returns, it holds treadmills, wine cellars, and projection screens. Architecture does not truly eliminate spaces. It transfers their functions as technology, climate, and economics change. Every wall, slab, and roof conceals a reason. If uncovering these stories changed the way you see today's homes, subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications and join us for the next investigation into the invisible engineering of everyday life.